It all began on an ordinary sidewalk. But what followed? Anything but ordinary. When a pregnant black woman is violently attacked by a police officer in plain sight, the city looks away, until her husband steps forward. What no one realized was that he wasn't just another man. He was the kind who doesn't wait for justice. He makes it happen. What unfolds is a fight that shatters the silence, exposes deep corruption, and forces an entire city to face a truth it tried to bury. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the end. Because this story doesn't go the way you think it will. Before we begin, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a story that matters. It was supposed to be a peaceful afternoon, one of those warm, golden days where North Carolina feels almost like a dream. The breeze moved gently through the trees, and the sun stretched across the sky like a quiet promise. Keira Bennett had just clocked out of her shift at the local library. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't late. She was just walking home, one hand gently supporting her 8-month pregnant belly, the other holding a small paper bag filled with oranges she'd picked up from the market. Her pace was slow, deliberate. Every step meant more now. It wasn't just a walk, it was the future in motion. All she wanted was to make it home to her husband, Marcus. Marcus Bennett ran a small counseling center for veterans just a few blocks away. That night, Keira had planned to surprise him with his favorite meal, chicken and dumplings, just like his grandmother used to make. She even smiled, thinking of the look on his face when he came through the door. For a brief moment, everything felt right. The world felt gentle. But that moment didn't last. As Keira reached the corner of Hill and Fairview, a police cruiser slowed to a crawl beside her. The low grumble of the engine sounded like a warning. She barely noticed it, until it stopped. Tires squealed. The door flew open. A tall, broad-shouldered officer stepped out. Pale skin, square jaw, buzzed hair. Officer Travis Gentry. Folks in the neighborhood knew the name. Quiet whispers in barbershops. Warnings passed down like family secrets. He was the kind of cop you didn't want noticing you. And that day, he noticed Keira. "Stop right there," he barked. Keira froze, startled. "I'm just walking home," she said softly, not wanting trouble. Her voice was calm, respectful. But Gentry advanced like she was dangerous. "You look like you're loitering. That's suspicious." His hand hovered near his holster. Keira instinctively touched her belly. The baby moved, almost like it knew something was wrong. "Sir, I'm not loitering," she said gently. "I live right down the street." "Don't get smart with me," he snapped. "I said stop moving." She wasn't moving. She wasn't even breathing deeply anymore. Her whole body had stiffened with a quiet kind of fear. "I'm not arguing," she whispered. "Please." But that word, please, only made things worse. Without warning, Officer Gentry shoved her. Hard. Keira stumbled. The bag of oranges spilled. She reached instinctively to protect her stomach as she fell, landing hard on the sidewalk. Pain bloomed through her body. And then, he kicked her. Straight in the stomach. It wasn't loud. But it was final. Her scream tore through the air. She collapsed, curling over her belly, hands shaking. Her world blurred. Gasps from onlookers. Someone screamed. Phones were pulled out. But no one stepped in. No one stopped him. "She's pregnant," a woman shouted. "Call 911. Officer Gentry turned his back. Walked away. Like it hadn't happened. But the cameras were rolling. And the internet doesn't forget. Keira was rushed to the hospital. Fear trembled through her body, but one name echoed in her mind, Marcus. Marcus Bennett was halfway through a grief counseling session when his phone rang. The nurse's voice was urgent. "Your wife is at New Hope Medical. She's asking for you." He didn't remember the drive. Only the sound of tires screeching and the words critical condition repeating in his head. When he burst into room 216, the world slowed to a crawl. Keira was lying pale and bruised under the fluorescent lights. Her lip was split. Her belly was rising and falling, barely. She was alive. The baby was alive. For now. Marcus fell to his knees beside her bed, his voice cracking. "I'm here." Keira looked at him through swollen eyes. "He kicked me," she whispered. "Marcus, he kicked me." Those 5 words were all it took. Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not grief. Not rage. Something deeper. A storm that had waited too long. The doctor came in, explaining something about trauma, fetal monitoring, placental risk, but Marcus wasn't listening. His eyes were on the bruises that painted Keira's stomach. "Did he say anything to you?" he asked softly. "He said I was loitering," Keira said. "I told him I was going home. I didn't yell. I didn't resist. I couldn't do anything when he pushed me. And no one helped." Marcus gripped her hand. His jaw clenched. "We're going to fix this," he said. "He doesn't get to walk away." By then, the video had already gone viral. It was short, less than 40 seconds, but devastating. No shaky angles. No edits. Just a pregnant woman being shoved, kicked, and left on the pavement. By midnight, the clip had 3 million views. Outside the hospital, people began to gather. First 5. Then 50. By dawn, there were hundreds. Not just teenagers and activists, elderly pastors, retired nurses, veterans in their uniforms. They stood quietly, holding candles and signs. "Justice for Keira. Our mothers are not threats." Marcus watched from the 3rd-floor window. And in that moment, he understood. This fight wasn't just his. It was bigger. It was every woman who had ever been treated as less. Every mother who had ever been dehumanized. Every man who had stayed silent because he didn't know what to do. But Marcus, he wasn't staying silent. Not anymore. The night after the video of Keira's assault went viral, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat in the quiet hospital room, his eyes fixed on the screen, where the footage was being shared over and over again. The hashtags, #JusticeForKeira, #EndPoliceBrutality, spread like wildfire. But something inside him burned hotter than the anger that had been rising all night. It wasn't just about the video. It wasn't about the likes, the shares, or the public outcry. It was about taking action. By morning, Marcus had made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for someone else to do what needed to be done. He wasn't going to rely on the justice system that had so often turned a blind eye to people like Keira. He was going to be the one to expose the truth, and make sure that Officer Gentry didn't get away with it. He stood up, dialed a number, and waited for the familiar voice on the other end. "Detective Simmons," Marcus said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "Marcus, it's early," the detective replied, sounding exhausted. "What's going on?" "Keira's been hurt. Gentry did this." Marcus' words were sharp, deliberate. "I need you to investigate him. I need you to do something. I know, I've seen the footage. It's not something we can ignore." Simmons paused, then added, "But you know how this goes. It's not going to be easy." "I don't care how hard it is," Marcus said firmly. "I'm not letting this go. This isn't just about Keira. This is about every single person he's hurt, every person who's been silenced. We're going to be the ones to make sure he doesn't walk away." Marcus hung up before the detective could respond. Meanwhile, the movement had grown exponentially. People from all walks of life were coming together. At first, it was just a few concerned citizens, but as news outlets picked up the story, protests began to form. Keira's assault became a symbol of systemic abuse, a rallying cry for those who had suffered in silence for far too long. By noon, a group of lawyers had stepped forward, offering pro bono representation. They were young, idealistic, and fueled by the same outrage that had motivated Marcus. Together, they started building a case, not just for Keira, but for anyone who had been a victim of Gentry's abuse. The more they dug, the more they uncovered: false arrests, complaints about excessive force, even rumors of corruption tied to his badge. They knew this was bigger than just one man's wrongdoings. It was the rot at the heart of a broken system. Marcus wasn't waiting around for the law to do its job. He had his own plan. He'd spent years working with veterans, learning the power of networks, the importance of building coalitions. And now, he was doing the same thing for his wife. He began making calls, connecting with influential community leaders, local activists, and anyone who could amplify the cause. His voice was calm, but each word carried weight. It wasn't just about Keira anymore. It was about all the people who had been affected by Officer Gentry and the system that protected him. Back at the hospital, Keira was recovering physically. But mentally, it was a different story. She'd been through hell. The pain from the assault was still fresh. The bruises on her stomach, the fear that she felt every time a nurse came near her, it was all too much. But Marcus was her anchor. He was the calm in the storm, and she clung to him as if he was the only thing that made sense in the chaos. "You don't have to do this," she whispered one night as they sat together in the hospital room. "You don't have to fight for me." Marcus took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm fighting for us. For the baby. For everyone who has ever been hurt like this." Her eyes searched his face, her expression a mixture of love and fear. "You're going to get hurt too, Marcus. This is bigger than us." He nodded slowly, his jaw set. "I know. But I won't let this happen to anyone else." As the days passed, the pressure mounted. The protests grew larger, louder. Activists staged sit-ins, rallies, and marches, each one calling for justice, demanding accountability. And with each passing day, the city was forced to face the truth. Officer Gentry wasn't just a bad cop. He was a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system. And Marcus, he wasn't going to stop until that system crumbled. The tipping point came when Marcus stood in front of a crowd of hundreds, his voice amplified by a megaphone. The crowd had gathered in front of the police department, chanting, holding signs, demanding answers. "You know what's happening," Marcus called out, his voice steady but powerful. "But now it's time to act." He wasn't just speaking to the protesters. He was speaking to the people in power, the ones who had ignored the warning signs, the ones who had turned a blind eye for far too long. "If we let this go, we are complicit. If we stay silent, we become part of the problem," Marcus continued. "But if we speak up, if we stand together, we can make this right. We can bring justice for Keira, for our families, and for every single person who's been silenced by fear." The crowd erupted in applause. People raised their fists. The energy was palpable. Marcus had done it. He had rallied not just the city, but the entire community. That night, Officer Gentry's badge was pulled. It wasn't because of the protests. It wasn't because of the lawyers. It was because of Marcus Bennett, the man who had taken the first step toward a world where silence no longer ruled. And as the sun set on that day, Marcus stood at the front lines of a movement that was just beginning. The fight for justice was far from over, but it was finally being heard. And it was just getting started. The week after Gentry's badge was pulled, everything changed. What had started as a single act of defiance, Marcus standing up for his wife, had turned into an undeniable movement. The city was no longer the same. People weren't just talking about injustice anymore, they were demanding change. Marcus had ignited something that couldn't be extinguished. But Gentry wasn't going down without a fight. His supporters were loud, their voices a mix of anger and denial. The police union rallied behind him, declaring the whole thing a smear campaign. And behind closed doors, the higher-ups in the department were scrambling, trying to save face while distancing themselves from their disgraced officer. For Marcus, though, there was no turning back. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Keira's battered face, heard her voice, fragile but resolute, telling him, "You don't have to do this." But he had to. Not just for her, but for the countless others who had suffered in silence for too long. He had to be the one to tear down the walls that had protected people like Gentry. As the media storm raged on, new revelations began to surface. Investigators, propelled by public pressure and Marcus' relentless pursuit, uncovered a deeper network of corruption within the department. Gentry wasn't just a bad cop. He was part of a larger syndicate that had been using its power to intimidate, exploit, and cover up its crimes. This was bigger than anyone had imagined. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Anonymous threats began to flood Marcus' phone. Strange cars parked outside his home at night. And then, one evening, the message appeared on his front door, written in thick, dripping red paint, "Stop. Or else." Keira had always been the quiet one. The one who preferred to stay in the background, offering Marcus support without asking for anything in return. But now, as the threats against her family escalated, she found herself in a position she never thought she'd be in. "I'm not backing down," Marcus said one night as they sat together on their couch, the baby kicking in Keira's belly. His voice was fierce, but his eyes betrayed the toll this had taken. "I know you're not," Keira replied softly, her fingers resting on her stomach. "But you can't do this alone. I'm not letting you fight this fight without me." Marcus looked at her, his eyes full of a complicated mixture of love, guilt, and hope. She had every right to walk away, to protect herself and their child. But Keira wasn't that kind of person. "Together then," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're doing this together." The final battle was fought in the courtroom. The trial of Officer Gentry was a spectacle, one that made headlines across the country. But this time, Marcus wasn't just fighting for Keira's justice. He was fighting for everyone who had been wronged, for everyone who had been ignored by a system that was supposed to protect them. As the trial dragged on, more witnesses came forward. Some had been hesitant at first, too afraid to speak out. But Marcus had created a space where their voices could no longer be ignored. Victim after victim testified, recounting their stories of abuse, intimidation, and fear. And with each story, the walls that had once protected Gentry crumbled further. The day the verdict came down was a day that Marcus would never forget. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. The judge stood, the room falling into a heavy silence. "On the charge of excessive force," the judge began, "Officer Gentry is found guilty." The room erupted in a mixture of relief and disbelief. Gentry's face was unreadable, his hands shaking as the sentence was handed down. Marcus felt the weight of the moment crash down on him, but there was no time to savor the victory. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. With Gentry convicted, the movement gained even more traction. The people who had once been afraid to speak up were now demanding change. The city's leadership was forced to take action, implementing new policies aimed at transparency and accountability. And although it was a small victory, it was one that would ripple through every community affected by police corruption. But Marcus didn't stop there. He knew that there would always be another fight, another injustice to uncover. He was determined to make sure that no one would ever be silenced again. And so, he kept going. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. As the months passed, life for Marcus and Keira began to return to some semblance of normal. The protests had died down, but the fight for justice was far from over. Keira gave birth to a healthy baby boy, and Marcus found himself juggling his new role as a father with his continuing mission to reform the system that had nearly destroyed their lives. But even with all the uncertainty ahead, one thing was clear: they had won. Not just for themselves, but for everyone who had been let down by the system. The story of Marcus Bennett, the man who took on a corrupt system and won, became a legend, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right. In the end, Marcus learned something invaluable. Justice wasn't something given to you. It was something you had to fight for, and sometimes, the fight itself was the greatest victory of all. This was only one chapter in the larger story. As the world continued to change, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. And he would be there, ready to lead when the next battle began.